that person's dead. The person next to them is unconscious, not dead. And then I've got 3 kids in the back screaming and yelling. She says, can I help? Something like that. And I was like, I look back and I'm like, you can, but you don't have to. Like, this is obviously really bad. Started working on the unconscious one because although there were injuries in the back, they weren't as critical as the passengers.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Paratus podcast, the emergency preparedness podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have with us Ryan Mitchell. Ryan joined Pinellas Park Fire Department in 2002 as a firefighter paramedic and has built a remarkable career in technical rescue, SWAT, and high-performance emergency response. He's certified across almost every major rescue discipline and serves as a medical lead for the Pinellas County Technical Rescue Team. Ryan co-founded his city's first SWAT medic team, led it for a decade, led the creation for his county's medical specialist program, and has deployed to major disasters including the Haiti earthquake, Hurricane Dorian, and Hurricane Ian. He holds a bachelor's in anthropology, a graduate certificate in extreme medicine, and is a research collaborator at Tufts and Northeastern on stress, memory, cognition, and decision-making. A longtime EMS educator, former trauma center paramedic, and now division chief of EMS, Ryan has earned multiple Paramedic of the Year awards and Florida's EMS Pioneer Award. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'd love, we talked a little bit about starting about a case that could guide us through the discussion. So I'd love if you have started something ready for us, if we could take us through a scenario.
So I think one of the calls that probably speaks to just a massive cognitive load. One of the functions that we were serving at the time was drugs were pretty there's still drugs are available in our city, but at the time the opioid epidemic was really at a high point, and we had stuff coming into the city, we had stuff in the city, and so they were trying to clamp down on this. And heading into this situation, you have a pre-brief with the team, and there was some consideration that the individual we were going to be dealing with weren't kind of like your normal, guys. Like this was like a legit business for them. So guy pulls in, they kind of do their deal. We can hear them on our little earpieces and, stuff like that. We're listening. And we kind of, I know the lingo by that point. Like, okay, the deal went down. Guys swoop in their other cars to kind of block them in. The car takes off. Boom, jumps a curb, I think, and then heads out of this pretty busy, shopping center parking lot. We're like, hold, don't chase him. And I was sitting with a newer, again, as I recall, I was sitting with a newer police officer, and I was familiar with the code that would be called if there was a car accident. And we don't use codes on the fire department. We use plain English. We kind of switched over to that a long time ago. It's easier to understand, and you don't have to remember what code is this. In the case in point, this is the case, right? A code gets called out, and I said, car accident, right? No, I don't think they said that one. I'm like, Oh, I mean, you're PD, so you would know, right? And then one of the things that we did use plain English for were 2 things on the police side: medic, or officer down. Officer down was obviously that's one of ours. Medic is hey, there's some other class. So we kind of wait a second, and then boom, medic. I was like, there was a car accident for sure, right? And so we pull out of this shopping mall parking lot and get onto the back road, and traffic's backed up already. I'm like, oh shoot, it's down there, right? So I get caught in this weird situation where I hop out of the car and I grab my aid bag, which I have a decent amount of trauma kit, but it's not my full response bag, because it's kind of, that would be too much to carry. And even at that time, we were fielding a lot lower weight, lower kind of streamlined kit. I think we carry a little bit more now. So it's a balancing act, right? And this is one of the cognitive challenges, physical challenges, how much do you actually bring? A lot of stuff the space industry is still dealing with, how much do you actually put in this bag, right?
I'm just curious, when you were sitting down and waiting for whatever was going to happen,
Yeah.
Did you expect in your mind, like, were you going through, this is the worst that could happen, it could go well, this is how many casualties we could have? Is that something that you would, like, in that
Y-
scenario of assisting the SWAT team or being part of the SWAT team, is that something
Yeah.
that you would go about? And I'm curious of asking because obviously something else happened that you probably wouldn't have
Right.
imagined could have happened. So I'm just curious to see where your
Yeah.
head was at before everything
We
occurred.
try and pre-plan, and that so like the medics on the team handle like most of the pre-brief for the medical side, right? So I already have like, hey guys, we talk about like means of egress. Hey, these are our main thoroughfares. If something happens here, our rescue is parked here. We'll probably hit the interstate here. The closest trauma center is here. If we needed to land in a helicopter, I would do it here. There's an open area here. So we have some of those things pre-planned. We usually go over some of the environmental concerns, the populated area being one of the biggest, right? So that was obviously a major consideration. I think it was really influencing the teams. Like these guys are major players. They're selling a lot of drugs in our city, but we are not engaging full
Yep.
on in this parking lot. If we can get them, cool. If not, like just let them go. Like don't chase them, right? So I think things like that, you would consider environmental concerns. Are we going to an area that has? I mean, Florida's a tropical area, right? What kind of snakes might we run into if we have to dodge? Just all that kind of stuff. Dogs with houses. Sometimes we have reasonable intel on some of these places. Do they have dogs? Is it an apartment complex next to other people? Are there toys in the front yard? All that kind of stuff. We do try and pre-plan as much as we can and at least have resources staged. So like where we were in this vehicle, we also had a rescue truck parked, I don't know, a quarter mile away that could come. And it was one of our other SWAT guys in that rescue truck. So if we needed, they would kind of swoop in. But you can't plan for everything, right?
I was just wondering because obviously you can't expect the unexpected, but
Right.
this is, them running away and causing a car accident a bit farther
Right.
down the road is not something I would have expected
Yeah.
from a situation where, there's these guys and the police. It's just
Yeah.
interesting to see that obviously there's a general mindset that you're coming into these things with, but just the fact that, oh no, and I'm sure, you'll take us through the rest of the
Yeah.
case, but it's just interesting to see that even there's a general mindset, but then there's still these micro preparations where you still visualize yourself taking care of a gunshot wound, for example, and
Mhm.
then there's a car accident. So
I
there's still
know.
these differences in terms of preparation and mental
Yeah.
preparation as well.
Yeah, I think there was some naivety to at least to me, is like, if we're not chasing them, then I'm probably not gonna deal with a car accident, right? They
Yep.
have a guy in the car looking out, like, sitting in the back seat watching, right? So, clearly, if we're not chasing them, they're not gonna keep driving like maniacs, right? So, probably I was thinking probably more of a shooting or something that would happen right in that moment. So, yeah, I think, consideration, but not like, yeah, I don't know. They're good at this actually. Like why would they keep running if we're not running after them, right? I mean, that would draw attention to you, right? You would think. I mean, they could get like some other just line, regular police officer would catch them for speeding, right? So you wouldn't do that, right? But they did. So as I understand it, they hauled that they hauled, you know, butt out of the, you know, shopping area and like hit a major thoroughfare and like drove really fast and like blew a red light and ended up hitting this other vehicle. So I'm running down the sidewalk, right, with this aid bag, and cop cars are pulling up at the intersection, quite a ways down, I don't know, a couple 100 feet down, and they're getting out with AR-15s and like, large weapons, right? And people are getting out of their cars and, oh my gosh, like they're stuck in traffic because they can't go anywhere because it's car accident, right? So again, what is going on up here, right? And these guys getting out with guns and all stuff, right? And then I'm like running through them, like get out of the way, right? I run, I get up, and it's a heavy damage vehicle accident. One of the challenge I look in, I think if I recall, their car was like the first car I came up to. This is a little bit vague, but I didn't see anybody in that car, and I looked at one of my, you know, compatriot, SWAT guys, and it's like, "Where are they?" And they're like, "They took off running. We're out." And was like, and I look in the other car, and I've got like 3 kids in the back seat. I've got 2 patients in the front. I knew right out of the gate that the driver was most likely dead. And I don't know if you can. would agree with this, but I've always considered, I'm not really a spiritual guy or anything like that, but there's some sort level of whatever life is. There's some level of inanimate object that a body becomes, to
Hmm.
me at least. And it's probably very imperceptible movement that I'm just like passively picking up on, right? When it's not there, it feels pretty obvious that it's not there.
Yeah. And it's
Uh,
probably a combination of color and
yeah, there's
breathing
no chest
and
rise, and that I would
yeah,
just naturally be looking for, but I don't see.
absolutely.
All of
Yep.
those things combined. But I was like, that person's dead. The person next to them is unconscious, not dead. And then I've got 3 kids in the back screaming and yelling, right? And I kind of realized, okay, like I got to deal with who's the priority here, right? And one of the kids was covered in blood, so their feet were covered in blood. I thought their feet had been like mangled, right? So I was like, oh shoot, okay. So let me just quickly kind of see what I'm dealing with, and then I'm gonna. And actually, that was right. A nurse, a woman had come up in scrubs, and she's like, can I help you? Because she realized I was by myself, right?
Yeah, because
And
that's
it
what I
was
was going to ask, Ryan. Because you arrived
yeah,
there, you're the first,
before my rescue shows up, right? Yeah.
right? So you're the first medical person
Hmm.
there, and you're faced with these,
Yeah,
five people
yeah,
in the car.
yeah. So she says, can I help? Something like that. And I was like, I look back and I'm like, you can, but you don't have to. Like, this is obviously really bad.
Hmm.
Like I'm willing to accept your help, but I kind of was like, however, I in a brief couple of seconds, like, you need to know like kind of what you're biting off here.
Yep.
And she was like, no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm like, okay. All right. Well, I keep talking about kit. At the time, we keep like a pediatric BVM. So not a full size BVM, takes up less space. Pediatric
Yep.
BVM still gets you a good amount of milliliters of, or cc's of oxygen. Bag her. Let me just try and figure out what's going on with these kids because they're kind of screaming. And one had a broken femur. Just again, trying to process visual data. I pull off the socks of one of the kids, and as I'm saying this, really triage wise. So I'm realizing as I'm talking about, as I'm saying this out loud, that the triage side, probably there was a bit of a friction point here because the individual in the passenger seat really is the priority patient at that point.
Hmm.
Um, I'm auctionating them. Actually, the nurse is auctionating them, but I still was kind of distracted, for lack of a term, on the kids and trying
Yep.
to figure out what was going on with them. I think in my mind, like if one of these kids is like absolutely critical, then I need to probably divert to them. I don't know.
Yep.
Just a balancing and decision matrix. And I thought, like I said, one of the kids' feet was mangled. So I was like, I was kind of worried that there was some sort of like more significant hemorrhage because there's just a lot of blood there. And I realized, unfortunately, it was the individual in the driver's seat's blood
Mm.
like leaking onto the kid. So once I got the socks off, I was like, oh, this is okay. Okay. And this was a family member of them that they knew. So that's the thing, right? So I talking about like how if somebody's dead. They knew and were like yelling about it, right?
Mm.
That's how like it's kind of like obvious. It wasn't major trauma, but they just knew, like, and I knew,
Yep.
and so that was like also like a cognitive load, at least for me in the moment. There's emotional triggers to that. There's
Yep.
so you've got 3 children yelling that family member is dead. You have really, I need to cycle back to this other patient, kind of lead those kids, but I also want to like kind of comfort them because they are dealing, I don't know, it's like, what's the right perfect recipe here? I don't know. But started working on the unconscious one because like, although there were injuries in the back, they weren't as critical as the passenger seat. And, I don't know what timeline we're talking about here, but maybe a minute or 2, I guess, maybe 3. Then my rescue shows up on scene. I don't remember what happened after that. I assume we took the unconscious person, but I don't really remember now. It's kind of a blur at this point. But that whatever happened after that turns into your normal medical, basically. You you have all the gear and you have all the stuff, and then you can kind of continue on doing what you're used to, right?
And it is that what you were thinking about when you approached the car, that, you kind of had this first few minutes where you needed to realize what was going on and then knew that help was going to come and that you weren't alone? or did you feel that you might have to address the situation by yourself, for some amount of time until somebody else arrived? Is that something that you
Yeah,
think had an
I
impact on
knew
how you were assessing and thinking about what was going on?
I knew that I was going to have to do it on my own for a bit. I knew that that was going to be the case because I couldn't even we couldn't even drive our vehicle up close enough. So I had to run to so I
Interesting.
also, I knew that it was going to take a second for the rescue truck to get there just on a good, because maybe the rescue truck's not even needed, right? So maybe I get there and I triage, I don't need the rescue truck. That would be one consideration to, take because you're balancing resources. If I don't need another big truck in here, definitely, obviously, did need them. So that's also going to be a delay. Um, so yeah, I knew that I was going to be on my own for a little bit, but it's kind of, again, training under stress. That's what you kind of expect.
Yeah, and so you say training under stress. Have you before this happened, I'm sure you had situations probably similar, maybe worse than that one before. How did you feel that you were prepared for that when it happened? Is that something you had thought about before? Is that something you feel that you had been trained for before? Because I mean, I've heard a lot of stories, and this is very different, I should say. The whole kind of aspect of you're
Hmm.
doing something, expecting things to happen, something completely different happens, and then you're kind of the only person arriving at a very catastrophic scene. I'm just curious, how did you feel that you were ready? And you said at some point, poof, training kicks in. Obviously, when all these other people arrive, because then you can kind of divide the work and go into a little bit more of what you were trained, to do on a more
Yeah.
individual basis.
I think, well, one thing is this is not this kind of specialty team is not something that you become a part of, unless you've been on the job for a while. So you have to have some level of experience and also recognized by your peers. So, I started this, the SWAT medic team didn't exist, myself and another, he's now a chief, kudos to him. So, um, we started it together and, started pulling in people. You're like, okay, this person would be good. This person doesn't necessarily. We have a lot of the scoring system and you take a test and you do those physical stuff. But really what it comes down to is everybody looks at it and goes, yeah, okay. But like I've seen this person under pressure or I've seen this, like this is who we want. Obviously you have to meet the litmus test, but it's pretty specific on who you would want involved in that. So I think luckily I was one of those people that was chosen to kind of take this project on. And so I had some experience, I think, and I don't know what came first. There's another call and I won't get fully into like a whole another call, but like there was a triage, a vehicle had rolled over multiple times on a major thoroughfare. Um, there were 2 ejections, and this is actually pretty remarkable. And I think these are some of the things that I had dealt with prior to this, so I think that's probably why it prepared me a little bit. But when I got to the one patient laying in the roadway, broad daylight, and also again, the other vehicle, the other units that I was working with that would normally respond were on another call, so it was another delay. So just me and my partner and I, and right out of the gate, initial patient supine in the roadway. Um, One pupil dilated, obvious, most likely some herniation syndrome already occurring. Get to the vehicle, another individual in the vehicle. They were kind of pinned under a chair under one of the seats of the vehicle, but were actually like, I'm okay. I just can't get out of this chair. I'm like, good, I'll be back. There's another person on the side of the road. We call it a signal 7, but they're deceased immediately. I could tell deceased. And then there was another person like rocking and crying, right? And I was like, "Did you get thrown out of this vehicle?" They were like, "No, no, no." I was like, "Okay, so you got out of the car and wow, you must have had your seatbelt on." I'm trying to just put together like what kind of injury modality, did this person get exposed to? And they're like, "No, I didn't have my seatbelt on. I just held on to the seat when it rolled." They just they said they just held on. They had some grip on it and the vehicle rolled and they just held on and then walked out of the car. That's unbelievable. Like unbelievable. Because the person next to him dead, right? And then another person got ejected, right? So, these are we're a pretty busy system. our city specifically is very busy. A lot of major thoroughfares going through. Crime at the time was higher. It's really mellowed out to be a fairly cool city, and it was always cool, but it's definitely like become pretty diverse. There's lots of cool events. It's like actually really remarkable to see what the city's become. But at the time, it was lower income. A lot of the areas, not all of them, but a lot of them are lower income. A lot of what we call trailer parks. A lot of drugs, a lot of stuff, a lot of fires. So we had a lot of experience. So I do think there's some level of preparation there. But again,
So is it, let's say you were to get someone into the SWAT medic team right now. Is it more experience? Is it how people have seen you act under pressure, or a combination? And do you feel that people either have it or don't have it, or do you feel that it's something that you could learn to kind of act in these real life situations? And I'd love if you can tell me a little bit about the kind of stress inoculation training that you do.
I think there's probably either have it or you don't have it. I think there is that level. I think there is a level of they have it, but maybe they can train a little bit, or they're just at a time in their life and their career where they're just not there yet, right? They're just not there yet. And sometimes people come into their own and you're like, you know what? Actually, I didn't fully appreciate what you brought to the table, but now I do, right? But I do think some people just aren't going to have that because I think there is a level of just suffering that's going to occur. I mean, even at a basic minimum, the calls are long sometimes, just waiting and waiting and waiting, right? Like things are just like not, the stakeouts and all these, that alone just is not that enjoyable. You have to kind of be willing to go through that SWAT school. You have to be willing to go through that. A lot of this stuff is just, is this person going to quit? Another thing, one of the things I think we would always look for in SWAT tryouts was, are they going to get angry? And are they going to project that anger onto other people? That's an interesting one. Like, can you get under their skin and like rattle them in a way? Hopefully none of my new SWAT, initiates are watching this, but one of the things we do is, and this is a collective effort, right? But midday, and Florida's hot, so it's often a hot day. They're doing all these trials, and they have to go through shooting drills, and they have to run around, and then we get to this point where doing just trying to get into your head, right? And doing jumping jacks, and all you have to do is just somebody, myself or somebody else is going to count off the jumping jacks. 1, 2, 3. 1, 1, 2, 3, 2. 1. That's all you get. And we're going to count off. And all you got to do is just do the jumping jacks with us. And you got to count off with us. It's a very simple task. But of course, they don't know when we're going to stop, right? We got 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, right? And if they don't stop, then we're like, why? Like, what are you doing? Then get in their head and then, start all over. We're just going to start over. Just start over, right? And of course, they're carrying something, most like they've had to like drag some heavy thing around and they're running all stuff. And we just kind of progressively, then do it with push-ups and you run them more and you do all stuff. And then they get to like a very end, it's hot and they've been already at this for a couple of hours. And this is just like the tryout, right? And this is like, I don't know what you would think of this, but here's the scenario. You have a chair at the end of this dusty shooting range. And they get to the chair and you're like, okay, all right, we're running and we're yelling and all stuff. Okay. Yeah. Listen, here you go. We got a plastic, usually a plastic glass of water under a tree. Okay, come on over here. Right. Come on. You give you a glass of water. And as soon as they go to sit down on the chair, you slap the water out of their hand, kick the chair. And like, it's kind of like demoralizing. And I know that doesn't sound like something that you should do, but there's certain people that are like, you could tell like they're mad, like they're really mad. And then what are they going to do with that anger? Are they going to put it back into the objective? Are they going to take that energy and cycle it back into the objective? Or are they going to put it out on you, right? And out on others? And can you kind of control that? And so it's kind of a litmus test, It sounds like, of course you'd be mad, but of course you're mad. But like, do you actually do something with that is not functional? Or do you go, okay, I see you guys. I'm getting on this team and you're not going to take this away from me. Like, do you have that in you? And if you do, then that's kind of what we want, right? So, things like that I think would be preparatory training, I guess. I don't
Yeah,
know.
and that's super interesting, Ryan, because I was sure you were going to say something about, specific to the field, whichever one in emergency response you're
Mm,
in, and trying to add a layer of, you know, sounds or,
yep.
something, someone screaming at you or,
Yeah.
a lot of people in the room.
Totally.
But and I'm sure that's one way of doing it. But then for sure, there's this whole, because I'm obviously anything you do in terms of emergency response, once in a while, you'll be, as you said, in these situations where, you think you've seen the worst and then it just gets even worse. Right.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
And just being ready mentally and finding the people that are ready to face these kind of challenges. So it's really interesting that you talked about a situation like non-medical, but where you can actually test. How do you find that going through that and for people to go through that? Because you said before, people that are in a SWAT team sometimes are, doing other stuff that's not SWAT necessarily. How does that affect or how does that improve their skill sets in these other situations that are obviously probably less catastrophic than what you've described or less stressful even maybe?
I think there's a level of clarity, I would say, that when you don't have to sift through all of that noise, all that, sensory noise, that you're able to make a clear decision. So when you've done it enough time and you've had to sift through that static to trigger the right predictive model, which is kind of what we're working out with Northeastern. When you don't have to do that, you're able to like make the decision a little easier. So you're asking about translation. I think that's what it is like you're much more capable, seemingly capable of making these decisions without all that extra static and stress. And that's probably what drove us to going, okay, well, I mean, conceptually, that makes sense, right? You don't have all this other stuff to sift through, but here's the fundamental problem. And this is, a challenge you guys, I think, are working with Paratus is for all the people that aren't going to be stress inoculated, how do you build a system? How do you build cognitive frameworks that can easily navigate significant, challenging information rapidly? Because the vast majority of the people I teach are not going to do all this. They're not going to want somebody shooting over their head and canines, and they're not going to want to do that. And they
Yep.
shouldn't have to, right? You know, the vast majority of physicians don't become emergency room physicians, right? It's only a small subsection of you weirdos that decide to go that far down the rabbit hole, right? And go through all this adversity to get there. The problem is that a lot of people are still going to get faced with these challenges. So how do you get at those people? And is there some level, if I could put everybody through SWAT school and medical specialist training, that we do on the disaster side, if I could do that, great. If everybody could go through, ER residency, hey, cool, right? Then we're good, potentially. But they're not going to do that. So what happens when those other people face these challenges? Is there a way to get at some, I had talked with a buddy of mine who was working with, he's a kind of a creative guy, worked for Space Force for a while, but like we can't, was talking to me, he was talking about like marketing and minimum viable product. Like what's the minimum viable thing that I could create here? And what would be the minimum viable level of stress or training that I could give somebody that gets them over the bar, but isn't asking them to do something that they just wouldn't do? And can we research that, right?
Yeah, so tell me, what is your research? Is there anything you can tell us about what you figured out so far? Is there, some
Yeah. So,
ideas or general tracks that you're on that you think would be stuff that will be working? And if I understand correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong,
mhm.
Ryan, but the goal is to see if you can figure out a way to, instead of doing the SWAT trials for stress inoculation training, is to find what's the minimal amount of stress that you can
What's the
induce to
minimum?
people to kind of
Yeah.
get them used to. Is that it?
What's the minimum viable product? And part of it is also like what is actually going on, right? So where is the pinch point? Is it the stress? Is it the cognitive stress? Is it the lack of predictive models for the event? I think probably what we're finding is uncertainty is probably a bigger, one of the biggest drivers of these friction points. So I've got I'm part of a research paper that's being released. Actually, I'll give a credit a guy named Himanshu Chaudhary. I might be pronouncing his last name right. I'm sorry, Hamachu, but he's a good guy. Like, great dude. Like, uh, very brilliant researcher. Working under a Dr. Ayanna Thomas at Tufts, and they put EMTs through some stress and uncertainty training where they give them a scenario and they kind of relax them, and then they have different there's social stressors and different things. I think they don't quote me on this, but I think they even got to the point where they if you put their hand in ice water for as long as they can, and then try and engage a scenario. Part of it's a TRIR social stress test is part of this protocol. And the stress had some issues. Like when people got stressed, there were some issues, but it was not like, as far as I can tell, it was not as dramatic as the uncertainty and stress. It seemed like people, when they were a little more certain and stressed, they could still navigate through unstressed.
Yep.
But the uncertainty seems to be kind of like a driver. And so if I pair that with, and there's a lot more. He's presenting at Psychonomics in Colorado in like a week or two. So kudos to you, Manchu. You're gonna kill it. Um, Part of what might be occurring here is the other team we're working with at Northeastern. They have spent a lot of time trying to understand and build frameworks for one of the main researchers, Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, has created like a framework called the theory of constructed emotion. Basically, they've studied what they call predictive models, and you can actually show pretty consistently uh, the parts of your brain that are triggering an action. Those parts are lighting up uh, before the actual action is taken, which
Mm.
kind of makes sense. But it's
Yep.
even before really you felt like you did the thing. So milliseconds up to 7 to 10 seconds, I think is what I heard. Like quite a distance prior to, oh, I'm going to pick up this cup, or I'm going to touch this button, or I'm going to do this thing. So a lot of what we're doing, especially in the emergent environment, is most likely occurring prior to us feeling like we did it. I'm going to put the IV in. I'm going to choose this med. The predictive model has chosen. So there's a really great example. My mechanistic kind of anatomic physiologic brain, even working with this team, was still like, but I mean, come on, like we're reacting to something here. Like I get a stimulus and I do a thing like that. That's got to be there somewhere, right? So what helped me, I'll throw this out to you, is I had to kind of run the numbers a little bit on some processes and see like, okay, are we really not reacting to stimulus here? Are we really just stimulus makes it in, predictive models are matching with that stimulus, but once I feel like I've done the thing, the next predictive model is already launching me towards another thing. And what we're talking about is allostasis, right, versus homeostasis, right? So allostasis is preparation of the next physiologic state matched with the cognitive reality that you're matching with all of that. And man, okay, now we're talking about training. Now we're talking about what is actually happening to us in the field here. If that's what's happening, if these predictive models are already kicking off, right? And if uncertainty challenges how we're pulling some of the encoded memories that we've learned in the past, um, maybe more poorly. Now we're getting to maybe the meat and potatoes here of like how our brains are working in these environments. And then is there a way that we can build better predictive models, right? Is there a way that you can train more fluid movement through uncertainty and stress? I think trying to set like what is the actual problem we're trying to get at? Because again, if I get sent over through SWAT school or emergency residency or whatever, then great. Well, they're not going to do that. So then you have to know what the problem is to know like actually how to build something better. I don't know what that's going to look like. I mean, it took us a year working with the Northeastern team just to make sure that, okay, we understand enough of what you're doing. You understand enough of what we're doing. And they're still working through that. Dr. Karen Quigley was just down in our city. She did some ride-alongs with us. We did some scenarios. Took her to another training, the medical specialist training that I wasn't teaching this time, but I teach with a group called Disaster Medical Solutions. awesome group of people. And it's very intensive training. She got to see some of that. So we're trying to speak the same language and get on the same platform to then really build like the research question, which part of these things do we really get at? The real challenge, one of the earlier podcasts I ever heard with Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, she was talking to this other neuroscientist, and they were saying, because all we've talked about is a stimulus coming from outside. That's the only thing I talked about in this scenario. We didn't even consider the stimulus coming from inside the body. And if you, I think the thing that stuck with me, like if your brain was actually processing all the stimulus coming from inside your body, like you were aware of that and processing that, it would be a horror show. The phrase horror show stuck. I'm like, when we really think about it, if I was thinking about what's the pressure of the synovial fluid in my knee right now, and the enzymes in my liver and, movement in my mesentery, like whatever, right? All of that at once, man, I'm not leaving this chair. That's too much to process, right? So again, that has to work on some level of predictive model. Our previous experience has to play into the predictive model. So it's the outside, the inside, and the memory combined to create a reality. Because again, like you said, all of this is happening inside the black box of our brain. So we're creating a reality that's unique to each other. And that's the other challenge. In the fire department, for example, we have about 17 firefighters that show up to every fire scene, actual fire scene, 17 different people. In our system, we have multiple different cities. So you have different cities with slightly different gear, slightly different training, slightly different leadership. We all generally work under the same protocols, but there's nuances. Different people that went to different fire academies were taught differently, have different families, family background, different contexts of what it means, just maybe be barked at or, like to be interacted with. There's a whole social component.
Interesting. And so what's your feeling, Ryan, about, because we talk a lot about uncertainty.
Yeah.
Is there a way to get ready for uncertainty? Like if that's the main factor, even probably more than stress, apart from experience and having people be in these situations and at some point learn, and obviously there will always be cases you can't predict or account for, but you will have seen at some point a certain spectrum of these cases. Or what is your feeling? Do you think there's another way to kind of prepare people for that?
Well, probably how do we decrease the uncertainty, right? That's a big part of it. We've talked about the astronaut corps, right? They're trained to a certain medical level. And if you're a physician, you probably have a level of acuity and training related to medicine that would allow you to maybe navigate some of those things. But let's just be honest, okay? I will be vulnerable here. I don't remember everything that I was ever taught, right? And you're an ER doc. I'm sure if I don't remember these scope of practice that I have sometimes in the heat of the moment, I'm like, shoot, what was that dosage? I can only imagine that you maybe have been in that position.
Oh, for sure. And
All
I think
of
it's
the
normal,
information,
by the way.
yeah,
I mean, it's
huge,
impossible
right?
to know.
So even for them, they're going to forget something. But let's just take your engineer or your geologist or whatever that's taught to probably some level of paramedic level with certain space, specialty. That's cool. But like, if you are not riding with an ambulance service or a fire service or in an ER running those repetitions, I mean, how much you think of the amount of knowledge you came out of school with? You were so smart. I guarantee it. You hadn't applied any of it really yet, right? And it was only true like, oh, that's okay. Man, all right, I knew a lot, but oh my gosh, like, right. If you're not running the repetitions, if you're not doing it over and over and over again, when you're on the lunar surface and you learn this, clinical training back on Earth, how are you going to get through that? Do you have enough predictive models built at this point to really be able to navigate that in probably the most stressful, extreme environment possible? So I think probably having some sort of interface, just-in-time training, an app that you can quickly navigate through these problems is reasonable. I think that would be one thing. And I think some of the things we've talked about with, app level design is like, how many times do I have to click through the thing? And then maybe throw large language models or some integration there. And then you can like maybe really navigate through, even faster, right? So I think using some implements like that, there's a book, Atul Gawande. I might be mispronouncing the name, but the Checklist Manifesto.
Yep.
Great book, right? So maybe it's checklists. I know the Scottish HEMS helicopter emergency medical system, they use checklists a lot, and they have it built in. Like, hey, before we leave, okay, we're going to do RSI. We're going to drop this patient. 10 seconds. Keep bagging. 10 seconds. Resuscitate before you intubate. Take a second. Okay, we've got a tube. Tube is okay, size 7.5. Okay, cool. We have BVM. Okay, obviously BVM's good. Okay, we got, and just go through a checklist. Offload some of that cognitive load that you might have otherwise entered the situation with. I think that's smart. Having protocols accessible, getting over the ego of, oh, I don't want to pull out my protocols. I'm supposed to know all this stuff, right? And this is something we try and I have no problem opening a protocol or book or like just, or little cheat sheets or, probably in the hospital, you have like the elastic little like band with all your cards or something. A lot of the nurses and docs have it. I don't know if you have that, but as a medic in the ER, I would keep like a whole bunch of different things, like, oh yeah, that's right. I mean, some common lab values that might not remember, whatever. I think that's probably maybe where we go with this. I don't know. I would be curious even in school though, like maybe use some version of the Trier social stress test. You induce some stress, hand in the ice bucket, or hey, before you do this, we'll have you go do long division in front of the class. Oh man, like, and then teach you some things that the memory actually can encode a little bit better sometimes under initial phases of stress. It depends how long the stress has been going on. There's different phases. So the longer it goes, there's kind of a cortisol level increase, and then the memory actually is not so great, but then it kind of gets good. Yeah, it's kind of like there's a cascade, which also, in the heat of the moment for, a very emergent incident, maybe in the ER, doing your after action. When people are recalling what happened, at what time did the thing happen that they're recalling? So maybe it was when their cortisol was kind of starting to go up and there's decrement in the memory, and they're like, no, I totally did that. And like, no, I didn't, like, I don't know. I think there's consideration for after actions and things like that, but I think implements are pretty good. One of the things I use in some of my classes is like, we like space stuff. You and I think are already kind of like this cool stuff. I say like, are you comfortable opening your protocol? And you have it electronically, opening it on a call. Are you comfortable, or on the way to a call? Would any of you guys do that? And generally, I don't know. Yeah, I should know it though. Old school is like, this book front forward to backwards, right? It's not possible. I don't think. I think you're gonna forget stuff. I said, who do you think the highest level like operational environment? Who do you think those people are? Who operates in the most extreme environments you could potentially imagine? Special forces, yeah, I'll give you that. Some like this, the special forces guys, man. I have some friends in that space. Pretty wild stuff. But like, I think astronaut would probably be like the top. There's no more extreme than that. They go into the pool, they practice the thing thousands of times. They know how to replace that part on the spacewalk, hanging off the Canadarm, and they know how to do this. They've done it over and over and over and over again. Neutral buoyancy tank. So what do they do when they're hanging off that Canadarm and they're screwing the screw in and the torque and all this kind of, they're considering all these things? What are they actually doing? They're in communication with Houston, or maybe even the CSA, whoever's running mission control. And mission control is reading line by line, turn the screw 14 times to the right. They're still using a book, man. Like, after all that, they're still using a cognitive offloading implement. Now, if they lose comms, they should remember it because they've done it so many times. But even in that moment, let's just cut out the possibility of failure here. I'll read you line by line how to do this thing. So I said, if astronauts can do it, you can open up your protocol and have no, hit on your ego about that, right? Like, because I'm not as smart as an astronaut, neither are you. So like, if they're doing it, we can just follow their lead a bit, Have football players and quarterbacks have their plays, written on little snaps, like, I think these kind of implements are probably helpful. So there's tools. Getting over the cognitive side on the front end, I think we need to research more about that. Is it really that functional to sit an adult in a classroom and teach them for 3 hours verbal and visual information? I don't know. I think the science is getting pretty clear that our brains don't really do that. You have 20 minutes and we might need to do something else. So like, is the juice worth the squeeze in that? Maybe you transition to something else, that might allow better memory encoding. I don't know. I'd like to research that and figure it out and maybe, someday have some answers for that.
Traditional learning, I think, is necessary at least uh, at the beginning for sure, because there's some things that I think you just need to see at least once and learn at least once.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I totally agree. It's funny. I smiled when you talked about the Krebs cycle and the anatomy. It's funny
Yeah.
how the first time you learn it, and then when
Oh
you
my
finally
gosh.
figure out that you actually need it, like 5 or 10 years down the road, how different it is. And then when you
Oh,
relearn
yeah.
it, how you remember it better.
Right, right.
So I totally agree with that. And then I'm just very in sync with, I love the example of the astronaut you gave, because I think when there's these, such critical tasks that you need to do, why would you not want to put everything that's in your power to do these tasks the right way,
Mm-hmm.
reduce errors as much as you can? So I totally agree. I think we really need to use the as many tools as we have, and it's not a question of I should know this. You're in stress, uncertainty. We've talked about these things, so let's just use as many
Mm-hmm.
cognitive aids as we can to just get us through this. Ryan, let's move into a couple quick fire questions to end this.
Okay.
What have you changed your mind on in the past 12 months?
Well, I think right now I'm in like a real philosophical kind of paradigm shift. So how do I find value in this like 30,000-foot view that I'm now in, right? Like I was directly connected. My hands were connected to the job 3 months ago. And there's a lot of value in that, like I get to puff my chest out and say, I'm a firefighter, I'm a paramedic, right? I'm a lieutenant and I have guys with me, men and women, and we get to do the thing. And now I'm like in an office. So I think but there's value there, right? I mean, I can, you know, take some of my experience. One of the things I'm trying to do is, you know, to enact that new value is like, okay, if I had to kind of really look for some experiences. I had to seek them out to find them. What if I could make those available, more readily available to people that were hungry at a baseline? They were hungry for this job, like they want to do something cool, but maybe they didn't know where to look, So maybe I can make
Hmm.
sure that that menu of options, hey, if you're hungry, I'm going to feed you. And you don't have to eat, but if you want, I will feed you cool stuff as much as I can because for me, probably not diagnosed with ADD or anything, but like probably some level of like wanting to get stimulus all the time. That was how I maintain my career is to get the next stimulus and
Yeah.
what's the new thing and kind of, so I think that, um, that kept me alive in my career. I probably would have quit a long time ago if I didn't have interesting new things to do. So that's probably one outcome of that value that I'm trying to define now. Like what can I bring to the table that can have the greatest good? It's interesting. I mean, I do like the idea of servant leadership. Again, I'm not really a religious guy, but I think it's a religious term. But the idea that, I'm not here to drag you to a finish line. I'm here to give you the tools and support you to get to the finish line. I'll make sure you have the right shoes, the right shirt, enough water, right? If we're going to do this marathon together, I'm not going to drag you, but I'll make sure you have the right stuff to get there. And I think, that's kind of hopefully what I'm doing. I think I'm doing that and I'm trying to put in place those things, but it's definitely a different value, man. I don't have my hands on the problem,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
but as you said, I feel probably the impact is sometimes even bigger.
Yeah.
So I totally
Yeah.
get you.
Maybe, hopefully.
So last one for you, Ryan. What are you hopeful for your professional life, or what's going on with your profession in general for the coming years?
I think our scope is beginning to be acknowledged as far as, hey, maybe we should broaden this in certain ways. Um, we're doing a lot more than I think people realize in the field and or faced with a lot of problem sets that we haven't been given the tools to really engage. So I think things like it's not as flashy as emergency, but like community paramedicine, mobile integrated health.
Hmm.
Think those are probably a reasonable path forward. There's a lot of technology involved with that. And again, space industry, a lot of technology transfer down, remote monitoring, things like that. I wouldn't say it's exciting. It's just it's probably the right thing to do to have these systems set up. I
Yep.
think I think understanding your operators, the sensor data that again special forces use, astronauts use, where they know the physiologic state of their members. I think that would be really nice to know on our side. The highest cause of firefighter death on the fire ground is cardiac arrest. So
Really.
it would be nice for me to know, hey, they're sitting at heart rate of 170 for the last like 5 minutes. Like, what's going on here? Are they
Yep.
really working that hard? And even that, like maybe this, So I think some of the tools to make our job easier I think people are really starting to understand what power tech can have in our field. So, cognitive offloading tools, I think would be very helpful.
Yep.
Um, and getting over the hump of like, some 1950s education where it's like, I gave you this 400-page book. You know it word for word, like not happening. So like, can we have a really good solution to navigate that? That would be very cool. So I think, some of the tech stuff is pretty interesting. I think that could be cool, and hopefully if we learn about the brain more, we can implement it in the right way too. Instead of just giving you something and saying, "Hey, here you go. Here's another thing," right? Another interface to learn out, like, does it actually work? And I think, there's some things that some people are coming up that might actually work.
Ryan, thank you so much. This was amazing. I really appreciate our discussion. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, you too, man. I appreciate it, and it was fun